Welcome to the Bethel Church Sermon of the Week. For more information about this podcast and other resources, visit ibethel.org.
I'm going to talk about worship, but I'm not going to talk about in the typical kid with an acoustic guitar singing type of worship. I'm going to talk about worship, the ins and outs, the all of worship, the in-betweens, from beginning to end, the heart of worship. Okay? Here we go. The promise for the humble heart that chooses to worship. It's in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 33. It says this. And by the way, God's promises are always yes and amen, and they never fail. When we follow what he says, his promises will never fail. It's impossible. But the one who always listens to me will live undisturbed in a heavenly place, heavenly peace, sorry. How many of you have been undisturbed before? Very rare. How many of you have experienced heavenly peace? I have here and there a couple times in my life. Free from fear, confident and courageous. You will rest unafraid and sheltered from the storms of life. That's the promise from God for those who listen and obey what he says. But it's actually pretty hard, isn't it? It's not easy to obey. Morris Smith says this, real worship defies definition. It can only be experienced. See, what we like to do in life is we like to retain information. We like to fill our heads with as much as we can about stuff, right? We learn, we read the Bible, and a lot of times it just sits up here in our head. It's information that we know about, whether we read it or we heard it from someone. It sits up here, but all of life is about the information that we receive here going down into our heart, thus experiencing what worship is versus it just sitting up here. How true this is, for worship was never intended by God to be the discussion of textbooks, but rather the communion with God experienced by his loved ones. True worship is having communion with God and getting to a place in life and living it out where you know in your heart of hearts that he is God and you are not. A lot of times we think worship is like a calm, cool, collected, passive person, or humility is someone that just is really nice and calm. But a person that's humble and a person that truly worships God is someone who knows that he is God and they are not. God didn't make robots. God's greatest gift to us is our free will. The government is trying to make robots, but God's destiny for us is to have a free will. And our greatest gift back to him is using our free will that he gave us and choosing to worship him. We may not be able to control the impact or size of our lives. I'm going to stop there. What I mean by that is this. If you've lived long enough, you know that not everything works out the way that you want it to. You know, when you're a kid, my kid, he's like, I'm going to be an NBA player, and then I'm going to be this, and I'm going to be that, and I'm going to be the president, and I'm like, wow. And then what happens? We grow up and we're not any of those things because we can't control our outcome in life. None of us can. You can't control when the IRS knocks at your door. Well, some of you can control that. But those of upstanding citizens can't control when the IRS knocks at your door. But what we can control is we can control the size of our worship. See, God hands out free gifts every day to us. Blessing, favor, all these things. But he's not looking at that. The highlight reel in heaven will be what we do with what we've been given. And I know we've said this over and over and over, and we go home and we live different. But if we can understand that the highlight reel in heaven is God seeing, I feel that way too right now, because I can't concentrate at all either. I know. The highlight reel in heaven will be all of it, will be the ups and downs. God tells the whole story. He doesn't leave anything out. God doesn't waste a thing. And then what we did with what he gave us. Abraham is one of my favorite people in the Bible, mostly because none of us would be here today if it wasn't for his one moment of obedience. He had one moment in his life where he had to obey God, and if he wouldn't have, we probably wouldn't be alive right now. It came down to that one moment. Abraham, he was not going up the mountain to sing a slow melodic song to God. Abraham was going up, right? That's what a lot of us think worship is, the slow time in a set where we sing. And I would love that to be worship because I'd be really good at it. That slow song that you just sing to God, but worship is all of life. Abraham was going up in obedience to God to put his most prized possession to death. His worship was defined by his obedience. Is your worship defined by your obedience to God today in this room? And I wonder if the process before this moment, all of his life, that process, when he was alone and he was waiting, I wonder if the process before this moment was prepping him so he would make the right decision when it counted the most. It's the fires of testing that purifies us vessels to carry the word within our hearts, not just our heads. The years of waiting prepared his heart to become all God had in mind, and the result is us here in this room today. The promise to him was, as many as the sands on the first service I said seashore, as many as the sands. Now here's the thing, you guys got to laugh with me a little bit. My favorite personality is sarcasm. And I know if the flipping test says that's not a good personality, but it is the best superior personality. So I need you to laugh with me. As many as the sand on the seashores is the amount of people birthed from that one moment of obedience in his life. So to encourage you, never think your season is a waste. God uses everything. God doesn't waste a thing. In the end, he will use it all for his glory. We try to hide the little things, the inconveniences, all the little things that we're ashamed of from God. But God uses it all for his glory. And in Abraham's life, we look at it and we go, they were so old. But the question comes up in my head is, I wonder if that, for instance, happened sooner in Abraham's life, if he would have made the right decision. That obedient, pivotal decision to sacrifice Isaac on the altar. I guarantee there's not a person in this room. I would never in a million years do that. So what? Sacrifice your kid? Now, that's the Old Testament, and they did that like it was their thing. But that is such an extreme level of obedience. You can only imagine the process in Abraham's heart throughout his life, the grinding that it took. Now, I'm not into demonic injustice in anyone's life, by the way, like sickness, disease, the obvious. But there is seasons in our life where we're waiting and we're alone and we're in the grind. I can't help but wonder if it took that long. And God knows all. So that God knew Abraham was ready to make that decision, which changed the course of history, yours and mine, both. One of my favorite people in the Bible is Peter. Now, for a few reasons, because I like to laugh at Peter, because I'm not like, well, I shouldn't say that I'm not like Peter, but his personality was large and in charge, and he was the one who was the most assertive in the group. And so we know his life, and then Peter was met on the shoreline by Jesus after the resurrection and was asked 3 questions, and then becomes the rock that was prophesied to him to build the church. But the days before that, in my opinion, I believe are the most important days in his life. See, we always look at the final thing and we go, it's so glorious. This guy's a freaking animal. He did this in the right moment. But if we remember the story, just a few days before, he made the dumbest mistake anyone's ever made in the history of mankind. Peter. And what makes it even funnier is just before that, he says, I'll never deny you. And then next day he does. Peter denies Jesus because he was confident in his own ability. Instead of acknowledging his weakness, he chose to cling to the illusion of strength. And then in that moment, he is all alone. And sometimes being alone is the best thing for us. Play that video if you could. Can you turn the volume up pretty loud?
You're okay. Chill out. Go lay back down.
Okay, so we got this puppy, and how many of you know, like, if you summarize the Bible into like 3 phrases, in my opinion, it would be, you're okay. chill out, and go lay back down. I really do. I believe that 100%. Every worship song we've ever sang is those lyrics. All we're trying to do is say it differently. You think I'm kidding. We sit in meetings and talk about how can we say the same thing in a different way over and over. And we're exhausted. We're out of words. The Bible in its entirety is pretty much God saying, you're okay, chill out, go lay back down. In the most loving, patient way. But in all honesty, we've all been told by God, you're okay, chill out, go lay back down. But what we do when we're alone is funny, like this dog. So we get this puppy, and I'm not dumb, and I know what to expect because we've had dogs before. I've had lots of animals. I have 4 kids. We've been married for 18 years now. So we've experienced it a little bit. Not as much as some of you, but I have gray hair. By the way, the end of my beard looks good, don't it? Yeah. I like my beard. Anyways. This dog, you guys, for a few, more than a few nights, you would have thought it was dying. It did not shut up in the garage by itself, flipping out like we do, like Abraham probably did, like Peter, like every man of God in the Bible, the in-between stuff, in between awesome, in between the breakthrough. We are like this dog. We're alone. We don't know. We're not in control. We're left in there with a little glow light, and this dog will not shut up. But I think those are the moments that are the most important in our lives. Because here's the thing, and I share this with my testimony, and I really believe this. We consider it the greatest gift as Christians. Consider it a gift when you're put into a situation in life when God becomes, whether by force or happenstance, your only option, your only anchor. Consider it a gift, because that's the moment, like this dog, when I am not helping this dog out. I shut the door and said, chill out. And that dog, on its own, had to figure it out. And he did. And now the dog sleeps fine and doesn't make a sound because he figured it out. But a lot of us, it takes our entire life to figure out that he's God and we are not. And those alone seasons are actually what make us who we are. David was left alone a lot, and you can read the Psalms and you can figure it out pretty quick that he was, well, we say he's a whiner, but he had a secret. He started out whining, but he would always end in praise. In the moments, he journeyed from self to God, despair to delight, feeling abandoned to affirmed, from pain to praise. And I love this part. And his moaning, his grief, his vulnerability gave way for the music in his life. And I think that's a challenge for every one of us. Does your grind in life give way for the music of your life to come out in worship to God? And I'm not talking about music, notes. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the music of your life, the worship, that aroma, that offering of God to God in your life. I love this story. We grew up in Weaverville, and we are hunters. I don't know if you noticed yet. You've been around a little bit. I had to have a hunting story in this because it just is. I was joking around with the team, and I said, I kind of have to, I'm glad I get to speak and do some of these things because it keeps me on point, because my brain space is in hunting so much so. I'm not saying I'd forget God. It's not true. I would not forget God at all. But I am a little obsessed. So I had to have a hunting story in this. Anyways, the story goes like this. Amen. Thank you, Sean. 15-year-old kid in Weaverville. We had a friend. His name is Stephen, and he's going hunting with his dad. And they're up in the woods on these dirt roads. And Stephen, he's 15, and now in Weaverville, if you saw a legal buck, you shoot it, because they're very slim pickings up there when we were kids. He sees this buck on the edge of this really steep cliff. This is a true story. And he says, Dad, there's a buck. His dad says this to him, I wouldn't shoot it if I was you. And Stephen's like, forget that, I'm shooting it. Gets out of his car, shoots this deer, and the deer tumbles down this cliff like a mile. Now, if you've ever hunted before, have you heard the term dead weight? Something happens when an animal, deer specifically, dies. It doubles in weight, if you've experienced it. So his dad looks at him, kind of like God looks at us sometimes, and he throws him a rope and says, good luck. And this kid, he's 15, he's like, cool, grabs the rope, goes down the hill. But it wasn't until that kid tied the rope to that deer and started walking back up the hill that he realized, why? Oh, maybe my dad knows some stuff. He realized in that moment why his dad said I wouldn't shoot that. And that dad, true story, sat in that truck all day, hours. Sat in the truck and let that kid experience the repercussions of his decisions on his own, alone, with a rope and a deer. And how many want to know that kid became a little bit more of a man that day? But even in leadership, a lot of what we do is and I'm going to go there here for a little bit. I'm not going to camp here, and we all have good intentions with people, but a lot of times we lead unlike God leads when we read the Word. Now, I'm not saying God is rough and tough and all that. God is gentle and kind. God is all of those things. He is perfect. He is kind. He is also stern. I think I could say this. Can I say this out loud? I'm going to say it, okay? And I can say this because I think it's the funniest thing. So I have a brother-in-law, Gabe. Now, Gabe's mom parented him a little different. Tough love. She would whip the crap out of him 1 second, and they give him a hug the next second. And that's what that dad did that day. And when that kid got up to the truck, he had a revelation. The information turned into revelation, and he understood the heart of his dad, so to speak, in that moment. And sometimes as Christians, we handhold and we coddle people so much so that they actually can't have their encounter with God. We say, your sins, it's not that bad. And by the way, if you feel that conviction, that's actually guilt, and you don't want guilt. That's not God. It actually is God. It is God. And we hold their hands so much so that they can't have that moment in life where they hit their head against the brick wall and realize they are not God. Everyone needs a moment in life where they realize for themselves they are not God. God is God and they are not. And sometimes we don't allow people we're leading to have those moments. And I'm not saying be angry and tough all the time. I'm just saying sometimes we need to let go. When people haven't heeded the warning like that son, when his dad told him twice, I wouldn't do that. And he's like, I'm doing it anyways. Okay, have fun. Sometimes we need to do that. Because sometimes people are stuck in cycles. Sometimes we're stuck in cycles. Because we got people in our lives saying, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, when it is not okay. We are talking about eternity versus the temporal. From eternity's perspective, things look totally different. Totally different. From eternity's perspective, it's not always about how I feel or the comfort I experience in the here and now. It's about how is my soul doing? Am I right with God? Am I preparing myself? Am I allowing God to be God in my life so that when that moment of me having to make a decision like Abraham and Peter, I will be ready? Are you allowing God in your life so much so that you're preparing yourself for those moments of encounter, those moments of grace? God didn't leave out the in-betweens in the Bible. The in-between, the good. He left the other stuff. I call it like this. Unlike most of us, how many of you are on Instagram? Instagram. What about Facebook? Everyone over 50. Just kidding. Hey, come on now. It's true. It's good. But how many of you know it's rare to find someone post a picture of a camera facing up their nose? They don't. I have friends. I'm not going to say their names, but I like to kind of keep both intact where I can show the true side of me and then the side of me that actually makes me look better than I am side. But I have some friends that only post the stuff that makes them look like demigods. So you know what I'm talking about. So whether it's the shot where they look like the action figure on the movie and they look like God, and then they have a post, the lyric below that's like, where did you get that from? Did you make that up? You ripped that from the poem book or something. Everything is, in our culture, we want to come across as, we want to come across as demigods. Let's just say it. We want to come across as people who have it all together, are amazing, the best looking. But rarely do we find anyone take a picture up their nose like this kind of shot. Or, check me out, I'm 10 pounds overweight. No one does that. And if they do 10 pounds overweight, but check me out now. God highlighted the entire process of the individual lives. It makes the miracles in the story that much better. And we sang it today, you're faithful from beginning to the end. He is patient and he is faithful. Jeremiah 29:11 says, for I know the thoughts. By the way, this verse, it's amazing. We were writing a song the other day, and we were writing a song out of this, and the guy who brought this chorus, friend of ours, he said, this is the number one read verse on the YouVersion Bible app, is that Jeremiah 29:11. And people need hope. People need to know what God thinks about them. They do. For I know the thoughts that I think towards you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. God's heart for us is a future and a hope. His heart for us is prosperity. His heart for us is peace. But we have a part to play in this. We have a huge part to play in this. We can't be scared of the vulnerability. We can't be scared of those moments in life where things aren't good. Things feel like have you ever, so Jen just had a crown put on, but do you ever go to the dentist, and some of you, when I say that word, you start to cringe. I personally don't have a problem with the dentist, but some of you do. Actually, I do have a problem with the dentist. I don't have a problem because they numb my mouth and I can't feel anything. But there's been times where they've numbed my mouth and it didn't quite numb, and then they hit a nerve. And then all of a sudden, it's like your whole world stops. And there's something about when you hit a nerve, that level of pain that happens. We hate pain. We hate that. But we have to embrace the fact that sometimes God is highlighting things in our lives. Sometimes we're going through stuff for a reason. And I'm not talking about demonic injustice. I've already said that, sickness, disease. I'm not talking about that. But sometimes we need to be alone. We need to feel what it's like to feel the grind. My dad experienced this several years back when my grandpa died. We've said this before, but my dad preached a message the week before he died, and he preached the message the week after he died. And it was very vulnerable. It was like my dad was feeling that nerve constant, and he exposed it in front of everyone. And I think more leaders need to do that in government, in church, and everything, exposing that vulnerable place. Because what it does is it just highlights the fact that we're going to get through this. Telling the whole story is important. And he said this the week after my grandpa dies. He gets up and he says this. In heaven, there won't be any pain, confusion, or loss. So I embrace, and we'll say embrace. I embrace my moment of pain now and give him praise in the midst of it. And this is the most important part, because that's an offering I'll never have a chance to give him in heaven. When we get to heaven, there's not going to be any pain, there's not going to be loss, there's going to be memory of that, but there won't be that as a reality when we're in heaven. So how much more now should we consider an opportunity to give him stuff that we'll never be able to give him throughout eternity? He's actually handing us freebies every time we go through something. He's like, here you go, here's your opportunity to turn it into worship, turn it into praise. Heaven and hearts respond to that real, raw honesty of heart expressed in faith to God. The greatest expression of faith is when we choose to worship in the midst of it all. You guys know when I'm talking about those moments. I've had those moments. I had those moments the last few weeks. I tell you what, I always feel like it's good. We have this retirement mentality in America. It's like there's going to be a day where we're going to reach this point where we won't have a care in the world, and then we're going to sail off into. I'm not so sure that actually exists. Anyways, another topic. Praising God when you don't feel like it isn't fake, it's faith. Acting like all is well when it isn't is fake. But lifting up praise about his faithfulness in the midst of the struggle is called faith. And when we worship, we are truly handing over control to him. I have a friend that he's one of those guys that's like really, really responsible, really, really intelligent, really, really successful. He has all his ducks in a row. Everything's perfect. His day is scheduled out until his wife gets cancer. Now, we obviously know cancer is not from God. I'm not saying that. But his wife gets cancer, and his whole world is turned upside down. And all of the things that he knew to work in his life, all of his logic and reasoning, the things that he set up as structure, all of his control did not work anymore. When a person gets to the place in life where all their logic and reasoning isn't working anymore, worship is their only option. A desperate offering is the song God inhabits. This is the humble sacrifice that's pleasing to God. It's a moment when you put God in his rightful place. So what he finds out is he's in this season and he's trying to do all this stuff, and he realizes that the only thing that brings him peace, go figure, is listening to worship music. And he never was really interested. You know, he's a leader, but he never was that interested in worship. He didn't understand it. He understood it up here, but he didn't understand it in here until he's met with this impossible situation in his life. And all he is left with is he can't do anything. He has no control. And all he does all day is listen to worship music. And now, for the rest of his life, and he'll say this, worship is such a important part of his life because there's so much power in a song. There's so much power in an anointed moment that a heart expressed in worship can create in a room. We used to do street ministry and go out, and if you know my past, I went through a lot of stuff when I was a kid all the way up through high school. I slept with my parents almost every night until I was 18. That's kind of humiliating, I think, if you think about it. Anyways, because I was so tormented. But what I learned in that season is the power of praise. And so we do this street ministry. And because I knew what would happen in atmosphere with worship, we'd go out and I'd say, don't evangelize, don't talk to anyone, let's just praise. And the story goes like this. So many people got saved and healed and delivered just in atmosphere. Just in atmosphere. Desperate people worship and value worship / presence music. Music that creates environments. Music that God inhabits. The noise goes away, and only the stuff that carries a presence matters to the desperate. And I think it's true. Desperate people can get over anything. If you get desperate enough, you can get over and through anything. And my friend got through this season of life with his heart intact and God in his rightful place at the end because of worship music. Worship like David. We are called to worship in all seasons of life. David's recipe was he worshiped, for the most part, the same, no matter what season of life he was in. When he was on top of the world as king, he found it in him to worship with that same hunger and desperation he had when he was in the cave hiding for his life when everyone deserted him. That was his secret. All it is humility of heart. People think humility is passivity, but a humble heart of worship is a heart condition that says God is God and I am not. And David knew this. And if you read the Bible, a lot of other kings experienced the hard stuff, but when they got on the mountaintop for a certain amount of time, they forgot God. See, a lot of us are perpetually in a state of crap in our lives. And I dare to say, I'm not saying this is theology, but it could be that if favor came your way, you wouldn't be able to handle it, and God wouldn't be God anymore, and you would be God. And I say that to myself too. So that was like pointing, but 3 fingers back at me. In case God kills me, I don't want to go through more stuff. Anyways, but handling favor and prosperity is like harder than handling the valley. But like King David, if we can learn to worship God in the pits, but also worship him with the same desperate heart when everything is going our way, when we can buy our way out of problems, when we've got so much favor, we can move a finger and people will go do stuff for us. Because I don't see a lot of people in the Bible that got to this point in their life and passed the test. But David did, and God said at the end, this is a man after my own heart. And I can guarantee it's because he knew God was God in the valley and he knew God was God on the mountaintop. And we too are supposed to follow in that example. Speaking of mountaintops, we have a label and we have a buck logo. And my team thought it would be funny. It wasn't actually my idea. to have the deer, because I like hunting, to have the deer emblem. And it's become pretty popular, around the world. Like people are like, oh, that's Bethel music. They're men. And women, but both men and women, not in between. Anyways. You know what? Sorry. Anyways, so they thought it would be funny to, like, this cool idea, and I loved it too, but we started getting these words about the heights and scaling the mountains and high places. And I can't tell you 100 words later, high places and like the stag or the mountain goat that scales the high places. So and many of you know, if you follow me, I love goats. It's weird, I know. I am a goat person. I don't hug my goats or, that goat yoga thing? Have you seen that? Goat yoga? It's weird. Anyways, none of that kind of stuff, but I do like goats. And so I don't like to over spiritualize stuff, if you know me, but one day in an airport, I did ask the Lord the question. I wonder if the reason I like goats has like a double meaning. Maybe there's some prophetic something why I like goats. So I got a magazine, so help me God, I felt like the Lord spoke to me, and so I studied goats, and I found out that my team got it wrong. We should have had a goat logo, for one, because the mountain goat is the animal that lives at the highest peaks, the highest points of the mountains. And the reason why, and this is actually funny, when you look at that magical, majestic goats, actually, they're not. But I'm trying to paint the picture that they are, because I'm going to go somewhere with it. We are all goats, really. Here's the deal. Goats are a prey animal. They're wimps. They're scared of everything. I have this little dog that's this big. And that dog gets through the gate, and those goats, and they're big. They have big horns, And there's 8 of them against this one little dog, and that dog dominates those goats. They are scared to death of that little dog, and they get in a little circle, and they're petrified, they're terrified. Goats are an animal of prey. But they go down into the valleys to eat and to drink, and their only hope of survival, wait for it, is to go back up into the highest heights, where the predators can't get to them. And the funny joke in our world is we're artists, we're creatives, and our emotions usually are like really up and down, kind of like a mountain goat. It's funny. We're high on the heights one day, and then we're down in the lowest pits the next day, and then we're back up in the heights. But our only hope of survival as Christians, as worshipers, as people who dare to say God is God and we are not, our only hope of survival is to go vertical in our worship. Because otherwise, there will be like a wolf or a coyote or something, and they'll eat us if we don't. That's when you laugh. That's when you laugh. Our only hope of survival is to realize that our worship, our offering, our heart posture before a living God like David, like Peter, like Abraham, that moment when we obey, when we bow before him, and we give him that offering of surrender, of obedience, that is our only hope of survival. And that verse in the beginning I read is what happens when we continually offer him that. But the ones who always listen to me will live undisturbed in a heavenly peace, free from fear, confident and courageous. You will rest unafraid and sheltered from the storms of life. Let's go ahead and stand.
Thanks for listening to the Sermon of the Week. This weekly podcast is now being translated in several languages. Visit podcasts.ibethel.org.